And I think without further ado, I'll let you take it away, Mario. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you so much. And welcome, everyone. Thank you, folks, for being here. Like Jenny said, my name is Mario Cordoba. I'm from Costa Rica, and I have been guiding birding and natural history trips here for more than 25 years now. So it's a real honor and pleasure to be here. Our topic tonight will be essentially linking birds that occur in your part of the world and birds that occur here in this part of the world. Essentially the interesting facts about migration and why do birds migrate, and how important it is to offer them suitable habitat here when they spend the winters essentially in Central America, specifically in Costa Rica. There's going to be different pictures shown and maps and that kind of stuff. So if you please follow me through all these slides, I'll be happy to talk to you a little bit more in detail about it. Specifically about migration, right? Most evolutionary theories propose that most birds evolve here in the tropics or in the subtropical regions, right? And then with time, these species found that it was good for them, to say it like that, right, to move north into more temperate areas and find food, right, away from their points of origin. So this is pretty much how migration started, according to the theories. And for the birds, migration is not only about escaping from climatic conditions, adverse climatic conditions, or scarcity of food, right? It is also going back to their point of origin. So we're gonna start with the presentation right here. Okay, sorry about that. Let me try and do something here again. The slide's not moving. Just a second here. Okay, let's try this one now. This should do. Okay. Okay, here we go. This one's working. Sorry about the inconvenience there. Just to tell you, for those of you that are not familiar with Costa Rica, we are a small country. We are located in the southern region of Central America. We border to the south with Panama and to the north with Nicaragua. And we have on the east coast, we have the Caribbean Sea, and then our west coast, we have the Pacific Ocean. Like I said, we're not a big country, 51,100 square kilometers. That is roughly 19,700 square miles, more or less. Many people say that we are about the same size as the state of West Virginia. So just to put it in perspective, how small or how big, as I like to say, Costa Rica is, right? Currently, the population of the country is 5 million. The capital is San Jose, located with a little laser pointer. San Jose, if you can see, is right here in the middle of the country, right? Surrounded by 3 other larger cities, right? And here's where the bulk of the population lives. More than 60% of the population lives here. We speak Spanish, and for quick reference, we are roughly 10 degrees north of the equator, right? And in this middle of the tropical regions, right? Speaking about the birds of Costa Rica, this is presented by our friend here. This is a spectacle owl. This is our largest owl, which can be seen mostly in lowlands. And this was a pair, as you can see, there's one to the right, but it's kind of hidden there in some leaves. It's about the size of a barred owl. I don't know if you later with that, but we can say about Costa Rica that we have so far the latest count. It's 924 species registered for Costa Rica. Okay, some are historic reports, some are extremely rare, some are like vagrant. So there's a little bit of everything. But the official Costa Rican list is 924 species. Of those, 220 plus are migratory from North America. Okay, and here is something that might interest you. a lot because of those 220 species, right, about 10%, specifically 24 of them, are strictly migrants from Western North America, okay, including Canada, Alaska, and of course, Western US. Those are the ones that their range is limited to the west, say west of the Rockies, pretty much. So that's, as you can see, that's a pretty low number if you compare it with the bulk of birds that migrate here that are mostly from the east, the center of the United States and east. Those are the dominating group of migratory birds that we have here. So 10% of the migratory from North America are from the west. And now 8 species of birds are what they call, they're like a breeding migrants. They come here to breed. They're from South America. There are 8 species that migrate from South America and they breed here in Costa Rica, okay? Some examples are fork-tail, swallowtail kite, the swallowtail kite, fork-tail flycatchers, another one of them. Streak flycatchers, plumbeous kites, and others. So there are 8 species that essentially come from South America and migrate in here. Now, as far as our endemics, birds that are only found in Costa Rican territory, we have 7 species. 3 of them live in Cocos Island, which is on the Pacific Ocean, about 300 miles southwest of Costa Rica. It's almost halfway between Costa Rica and the Galapagos Islands. It's a small island, and there's 3 endemics there. Flycatcher, a cuckoo, and a finch. And then the rest of them are here in the mainland. Okay, we have a ground sparrow, we have a couple of hummingbirds, and tanager that are endemic to Costa Rica. But if we mix a little bit with Western Panama, with the Chiriquí region of Panama and the Talamanca Mountains, areas that enter Panama or a bordering country, we can find more than 70 species that are endemic to this region. So this is a pretty good area to visit if you want to see some specialties here. Now, when it comes to speaking of our biological wealth here in Costa Rica, we have to take into account that the contributions essentially come from the fact that we are in between 2 huge land masses, South America and North America. So we are basically that bridge that connects those 2 land masses. So countless organisms moved across this bridge, okay? Also, the fact that we have the coast, the proximity to 2 coasts adds to the number of species that we have. We have a series of mountain ranges that cross the country north to south. That also aids to the creation of a lot of microclimates, right? And regions like this that enhance the number of species that we have. Now, I want to show you a little bit, let me see this chart here, if you can see in the bottom. This essentially is a chart that explains the number of species per every 1,000 square kilometers. You see in Costa Rica, as in most of the world, we use the metric system. So this is 1,000 square kilometers. So essentially what you do is you divide the size of the country by 1,000, and then you divide it by the number of species you have. You come out with a figure which will determine in some ways the number of species that you can find in such area. And this is where one of the areas where we shine. This is the density of species, right? Diversity and density of species is where we shine. Costa Rica has an average of 18 species per every 1,000 square kilometers. Panama, our neighbor, which is about 1.5 times, if you see on the right column here, rightmost column, you can see the size difference between the countries that are being compared here. And Panama is about 1.5 times bigger than Costa Rica. And so they have about 13 species, 13, 14 species there. And then here comes the heavyweights, Colombia, Peru, and Brazil, which are the countries with the largest number of species, but they're also huge countries. For example, Colombia, #1 country in the world in species, with 2,000 species found in Colombian territory. Well, but Colombia is 22 times larger than Costa Rica. And so they have a ratio of 1.7 species, 1.8 species per every 1,000 square kilometers. Peru is down there, and then Brazil, which is a huge, humongous country. It's 167 times bigger than Costa Rica. well, they are down there. So as you can see, this is where Costa Rica becomes, you know, what I call a specialty in terms of density and diversity of species, right? The concentration of organisms here is pretty intense. As we say here, is like the, you know, the countryside small grocery store. That's it's little, but it has a little bit of everything. So that's how we are here in the country. So this is just to put it a little bit into perspective and why the contribution of migrants, it's so important to these numbers in many ways. Now let's look at some of these. This was taken recently in the last couple of days from eBird. These are again more numbers. On the top left here, you can see the USA lower 48. Those are the lower 48 states. And then in the red circle, you can see the number of species that have been reported to eBird, okay, over the years that eBird has been active. So there's 1,014 species that have been reported here. Directly below that, it's Costa Rica. Again, the size difference, small. We have 909 species that have been reported, just slightly over 100 species more in the United States, lower 48, than here in Costa Rica alone, okay? Now, if we move to the right-hand side on this other chart or picture here, these are screenshots, basically. This was taken from the last October Global Big Day, organized by eBird, and, you know, hundreds and thousands of people take part in these activities every year. And Costa Rica pretty much always has been top 10. And this is birds that have been reported in 24 hours in a specific country by numbers of birders that go out there during that day, and they collect all this important information. Costa Rica last October had 731. We came in 9, right? Just below some of the, you know, heavyweight champions right here: Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Brazil, Kenya, Argentina kind of snuck in there, but yeah, typically we are there in the top 10 list. So this gives you an idea of how Costa Rica is, again, present in these important events. And of course, we try to organize very well, and we have lots of people organizing groups and go out for the day and try and see as many birds as possible. Again, another couple of charts there to put it into perspective. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of teasers here for what we could possibly see here in Costa Rica. These are some of the near endemics. These 3 here, at least, are some of the near endemics that are found in our mountains, in our highlands. Left to right, you can see the prongbill barbet, which is closely related to the toucans, and this bird is only found in the mountains of Costa Rica and slightly into the mountains of Panama, western Panama. Same story for the next bird in the center here, which is the long-tailed silky flycatcher. It's a close relative of the phainopepla and those birds. There's a couple of other silky flycatchers, gray silky flycatcher, northern Central America. And of course, our very beautiful volcano hummingbird all the way to the right. All 3 of these birds are, again, what we call near endemics, and they are found in the mountains of Costa Rica and western Panama only, okay? So when you come on our trips, we make sure that you see, we try at least to show you some of these wonderful species. Here's another sampler. The Resplendent Quetzal, which is the one bird on the left. Probably some of you or most of you are familiar with the Quetzal. It's a well represented bird of the Central American tropical cloud forests. It's found here in Costa Rica. Probably we have the largest populations in the country. It's also found in northern Central America, countries like Guatemala. It's their national bird. Southern Mexico, places like that, they have it. But here in Costa Rica, we also have it, and we share it with the mountains of Panama as well. So the Resplendent Quetzal is one of the most sought after species. You can see why. In the middle, we have the orange-colored manakin with a very small range in the South Pacific lowlands of Costa Rica, and then enter into Panama in the Chiriquí region of Panama. And pretty much the same thing goes for our friend here, the firebill aracari, which is another form of toucan. It's kind of like a slender type of toucan with that beautiful bill, as you can see. And those, the Aracari and the Mannequin are Neuronemics. The Quetzal, like I said, has a little bit of a larger range. So these pictures are just to get us a little bit prepared, because later on we're going to see some of your birds, some of your more familiar birds. Okay. All right. Now let's get focused on migration, right? What is it about migration? Why do birds migrate? First, I want to introduce you, if you haven't seen it yet, this chart is actually a poster that's available from National Geographic. I've seen it in full size. It's pretty big, and it's amazing. It's beautiful. So I thought I could just put that and show some of the main bird routes of many species throughout the Americas. Look at that. It's pretty beautiful. Costa Rica, put the red dot where Costa Rica is, so you can have an idea of how many of these birds pass by us or come visit us during the winters. So essentially, migration is it's about moving from one place that has less resources to another place that has more resources, right? Essentially, it's food. And also, it's about getting ready, prepared for breeding season. So you come to an area of greater resources, you prepare, and then you go back to your breeding grounds, and then you have that energy, that necessary energy to do that. And of course, moving away from harsh climate conditions, right? Climatic conditions, winter essentially in northern temperate areas, and even farther than that in Arctic areas. So that's essentially why birds migrate. Like I said in the beginning, many of them are the neotropical migrants. What they do is they come back to their point of origin. Essentially, they do that. But how do they do it? Okay, well, birds have learned to calculate, right, the sun's arc. They know by the height and the movement of the sun, they can get an axis north-south. So they follow that, essentially. There are other techniques that they use. For example, those birds that migrate at night, they use the stars for orientation, right? They can also sense magnetic fields, and some of them can pick up like the sound waves of breaking waves in the ocean, or their own calls, their echoes of their own calls help them find out where the mountains are, and they can follow along those mountains, and they find their way, right? So it's incredible. This is just simply amazing how they are able to do that. The vast majority of birds migrate at night. That's important, especially those forest-dwelling birds and shorebirds, right? The orioles, the tanagers, the warblers, the vireos, sandpipers, plovers, and those essentially migrate at night. There's another important group of birds that they migrate during the day. Swallows, hummingbirds. We have one hummingbird that migrates here all the way from Eastern United States, which is the ruby-throated hummingbird. You might be familiar with that one. That one migrates here. Imagine that long journey all the way from there to here, all the way from Minnesota to here, for example. So that's quite a ride, I say. So and of course the raptors migrate primarily during the night. We're going to go with raptors in a little bit. I'm going to show you a special place that we have here. Then there's the pelagic birds that they solely migrate across the oceans, and they stop on islands and cliffs and places like that, but they pretty much restricted to that. Now, all these birds, they tend to follow almost always the same routes each year, right? These routes are called the flyways, and basically, there are 4 major flyways in North America: Pacific, which has to do with where you are. In some ways, the Central Flyway also, the Mississippi Flyway, and the Atlantic Flyway. What happens with us is like North America is like a funnel, right? And then we are the narrow part of that funnel here in Central America. So it's like putting a lot of birds into that funnel, and then they all come down to here. Basically, that's what makes us a hotspot for migratory species. You're going to see it in a little bit. Another illustration that I have. And it's interesting that because these migratory patterns, these routes have evolved over thousands of years, essentially influenced by climatic changes, by abundance of food and things like that. So they have changed over time. And you have noticed also that, well, birds know very well, you know, when it's time to leave. They start preparing in, you know, in fall, like we just saw. We're seeing now the end of the fall migration here, and so they start preparing much before it gets extremely cold or extremely difficult for them to find food. They start preparing as, you know, late summer, and then they start moving down here around August, July, August. They start coming down. Some of them, others wait until September, others wait until October. But they do know when to prepare, because if they wait too long, it's gonna be impossible to find food. Same thing happens in spring, during spring migration. You know, they have to get there sometimes even during harsh conditions in early spring. And but they can't wait another day, because if they are there late, they're not going to have time to get ready. They're not going to have time to find food. They're going to have time to mate. They're going to have time to build their nests and raise their young. And by the time those young birds are ready to fly, it's time to pack and then head south again. Okay, so they have to synchronize perfectly these this migration patterns, like I said. So I'm gonna also talk to you a little bit later about how these patterns may change during spring and during the fall, but that comes later. Don't let me forget. This is a beautiful work done by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Some of you may have seen this. Costa Rica is right where the star is. So this is what I meant before, two huge land masses north and south of us. And so each one of these dots represents a single species. There are 118 species here. And then this is each and every one and every day of the year, right? During the different months. And then you can see some of them go all the way south, others stay here in the middle, others go, the ones from South America, they don't always come all the way here. But it's interesting to see this, how, look, August, September, right? October, and then boom, we get rained on by all the migrants here in the fall, right? And they stay here for the winter. All right, and let's see what happens later as the spring comes again, March. There we go, everybody's heading back, right? April and May. And so it happens pretty regularly every year. Some birds are so loyal that I mean, I have birds here in my backyard that I know they like have a yellow warbird that I'm pretty sure it's the same guy and has been coming here for I don't know how many years, but so they always, not always, but they generally come to the same spots. They're really loyal. Some birds may stay here for several months. They winter here. Others pass through. They don't necessarily, as we're going to see some later in other illustrations that I have, but some of them do spend the winters here. So we have both winter residents and passage migrants, as they're called. Okay, so we have a mix of both. Okay, so let's move on. I wanted to say also that some of these birds that they follow the flock, the migrating flock. They follow their parents and their families, their kind, and they come here as young. Others, for example, like ospreys and gray blue herons, they come here as young, and they may stay here a whole year until they reach sexual maturity, and they go back. So you may see some migrants, which basically the difference. A migrant is a bird that doesn't breed in the area, and a resident is a bird that breeds in the area. So you can see some migrants here, even off migratory season. So those are the ones that generally stay here until they are old enough so they can head back. Now let's look at some of the common. Like I said earlier, around July, August, you start finding some of the first migrants here. Some of the more obvious are shorebirds, right? Especially because they show up on our beaches on the Pacific, mainly in some of the mudflats, salt pans, and places like that. You can start seeing some of the plovers, sandpipers, and related. And this slide, it was tough to pick what I was going to put here, because this represents probably what are the most common migrants that we have. I'm sure I'm leaving out another bunch, and some colleagues of mine will disagree, but this is my personal choice for the top 4 more common migrants that we have. In not necessarily I did this by groups. For example, I put the spotted sandpiper like here from now on until May sometimes. Almost every river you visit, every lake, every place that has a little bit of water, there's going to be a spotted sandpiper. You know, they are numerous here. They are incredibly common. Same goes for the broad-winged hawks. The broad-winged hawks are interesting. I mentioned winter residents and passage migrants. Later on, we're going to show you some charts where hundreds of thousands of broad-winged hawks, they pass through here. They go south, they continue south, and others, they stay here. So they are abundant. It's one of the more common hawks you're going to see here during the winter. They're beautiful. I have one that lives here down by me. There's a creek, and then I can hear him soaring every morning, and he comes here probably the same as the yellow warbler. They come here every year. Swainson's thrush. Well, we have Swainson's thrushes here. They're mostly passage migrants. Some stay here, but when they're here, there are huge numbers of them. I was debating to put these or the red-eyed vireos, because during migration they're simply most numbers. But I think the Swainson's thrush is probably the most numbers. As you probably know, there's two subspecies, the russet back, and I think the other one's called the olive back. Mostly we get from the east, right? And then speaking of the east, we have Baltimore Orioles that are everywhere. They adorn our trees as they are here. You can hear them chattering, you can doing their whistles here, and they are everywhere. They visit our forests, our gardens, almost everywhere they are in the country. Even at high elevations, you can find Baltimore Orioles. So you can talk about some others, some warblers that are extremely numerous here, like Wilson's warblers, yellow warblers, and chestnut-sided. But a lot of them are eastern birds. Which reminds me, for you folks that live on the west, when you are here during the migration month or during the winter months, if you are not familiar with a lot of the eastern species, this could be a treat for you, because you would find a lot of those that do not happen in your part of the world, out west. So that's another reason to come here and visit during migration. Okay, speaking of those species, we're going to start with a little bit of description of each one of the, I think I picked about 15 species that are representative of mostly Western, mostly because some others are widespread, but you'll see why. So we have the Townsend's warbler. This map shows the abundance. Again, this is based from eBird reports. And the yellow or red yellow, it's the breeding grounds. The green is migration, and the blue, it's the wintering areas. This is interesting because these birds show the connection. There's that important connectivity between regions and habitats in the north and regions and habitats here in the south, and everything in between, right? So they depend on suitable habitat for their success. Townsend's warblers are generally affiliated with conifers, with pine trees and places like that. And as you see in Mexico and Northern Central America, they have main concentration of them. It's a little bit of blue here. Maybe you can see it in Costa Rica, because they're not numerous here. They are not common here, but they do make it here. They do come here, as we have some habitat for them. We don't have native pines or cypress trees here, or junipers, or those types of trees, but we do have some areas that these trees have been introduced, part of what was done in the past, or reforesting, things like this. So they visit those areas, and they also find that there's other habitat that they can use here. So Costa Rica might very well be and Panama perhaps too, the farthest south that the Townsend's warblers will spend their winters here. You'll see that in the maps. What I was going to show you before is that it is known now that during fall migration, right, the Townsend's warblers mostly go south along the Rockies, right? And then the spring migration, they come along the Southwest deserts and then the Pacific coast. But they don't always necessarily find the same or follow the same routes. They do switch, right? You know, what is good for them. They also use climatic conditions. They can detect, you know, changes in barometric pressure, so they know when the storm's ahead, so they can use that to push them wherever they're going, south or north. And also the winds, tailwinds that help them migrate in, again, more successfully, I would say. The Townsend's warblers, so interesting the links between the habitats here, the conifers, the pine forests here of Central America, and what we have here. And I've seen them also outside of pine forests. I've seen them in gardens and coffee plantations that we're going to talk about later. Some of this. All right, so we're going to start describing briefly. Won't take too long about some of the species that we have here. Some of your common species, cinnamon teal. Some of my colleagues are going to say, "Wait, why are you putting this? Because this is an extremely uncommon bird." Well, yeah, it is uncommon, but it makes it here. The migration, the winter, they do use some of our. They're not nearly as numerous as the blue-winged teals that we have here by the thousands, but then cinnamon teals do make it here. Beautiful. These pictures that I'm about to show are not mine. These pictures were taken from All About Birds and the Cornell platform. So these are not my own pictures. I must say that. And anyhow, so cinnamon teal. It's always exciting to know and see what's a cinnamon teal in Costa Rica because, like I said, they are not nearly as common. They're, you know, their breeding grounds are all the way up in the western U.S. and part of Canada. The colors here, this orange represents breeding. The yellow is migration. The purple means year-round, and the blue means wintering grounds. Okay. Let's continue because I don't want to take too long. This is a true champion here. This is this is by far the most numerous migratory bird that we have in this country. You're going to see numbers later, and then I will, you know, tell you why. They come here by the thousands, by millions almost. They might see them in lines and lines and lines, highways of turkey vultures. What is interesting is that some of them stay here, others go south. Look at their range. They breed up here, and then everything else here is year-round. But then part of this year-round is migration. You know, so it's kind of a mix. We have some resident, and we have some migrants. Mix. The one way to tell them apart is that the resident turkey vultures, they have a sort of a faint white band on the back of their necks. They're not fully red here, so. But then I haven't seen many people, you know, holding a vulture and looking at that band because it's not always visible. But then you can tell them apart, the migrants versus the residents. So turkey vultures, true champions, they make it all the way to south. Another champion here. This range map, again, tells you where they breed, migration, and all that. And then we have both. We have passing and we have a resident, winter resident and passage migrants. As well, as I mentioned earlier, some that do remain here a whole year. The subadults or immatures, they don't migrate back. They come with their parents, perhaps, but they stay here until they feel old enough, so they go back, probably usually next year. So one of those cases where we're sometimes finding ospreys in off migration season here. So this is one of the common birds. It's worldwide spread. It's not. This is a bird that is found in is everywhere in the world. Ospreys are important. They join this during what we call the hawk migration or the raptor migration. There's a mix, and then we're going to come that pretty soon. Another one that's part of that, a true champion. Look at this guy. Look at the migration in this. Breeding grounds up here, and then migration yellow, and then they spend the winters in Argentina. But if you take a close look, there's a little bit of blue here, right? There's a little bit of blue there. And this is because a small population of Swainson's hawks, they stay here for the winter, especially on the Pacific lowlands down by the dry areas of Guanacaste province, mainly, right? That's where they stay. So look at this long migration. Speaking of that, bird that is not common for us here. Even the maps are not really showing, but they do come here. We find them here. They're not necessarily common, especially in the Pacific, mudflats, salt pans sometimes. Along the Nicoya Peninsula, essentially, is where Nicoya Gulf, I'm sorry, is where you find them in on the Pacific side here. Beautiful bird, not common at all, but this one of their representatives that do migrate, not necessarily like west, but it's up here. As you saw on the previous birds, they're not Western necessarily, like restricted Western. The turkey vulture and the ospreys are widespread. But here's another one that makes a huge migration. Look at their breeding grounds all the way up here in Alaska, and they make it all the way to the southern coast of Chile. Good God, look at and they do it. They make it there and they go back. They make it and go back. There are other birds that as you know, there's some of the terns and many of the plovers and other sandpipers. They do these huge long migrations. They're spectacular. But surfbirds, you find them here mostly passing through. Some of them I've seen staying during the winters on the Pacific side. You see them on rocky shores, hanging out with other more common sandpipers like the ruddy turnstones and western sandpipers, leaf sandpipers. You know, they're far more common. Black-bellied plovers and things like that are more common. But then these guys not common, but they do make it here. There's a pretty reliable place along the Gulf of Nicoya on the Pacific coast. It's a national wildlife refuge that you go there and you're likely to see them there. All right, moving on. Black swifts. Overlooked, easily overlooked, or sometimes confused, but then they do also migrate through here. It's one of your perhaps common birds. I don't know if you're able to see them all the time, but black swifts do happen here. They pass through, and there's a small population that it's thought to breed here in the Central Valley, right? But again, it's one of the interesting migrants strictly from the west. Right, another one, which is also, this is not very common here. This is not a common swallow, but beautiful violet green swallow is reported every now and then, essentially in the lowlands, again on the Pacific side. Notice how I mentioned the Pacific a lot of times, so there's connections there going on. The Pacific side, violet green swallow is definitely a beautiful bird. More common swallows would be the migrate through here are, of course, barn swallows, cliff swallows, bank swallows. Those are far more numerous than these guys, but they're more widespread. So I try to select some of the ones that are more west of, and more familiar, for you guys probably. Keeping with the western, another interesting, beautiful migrant, western wood pewee. They pass through here. Some of them stay through here, and a lot of them, winter in northern South America, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, places like that. But hey, sometimes they mix here with eastern wood pewees, and they mix with the resident tropical pewees. So telling them apart could be a challenge sometimes, and hopefully they'll make their call, and you can tell them apart. But then they all converge right here, so that's interesting. We have a resident, like I said, similar size. It has a little bit more yellow on the belly. The tropical pewee, I was going to say. Another one, western kingbird. Here we go. These are breeding grounds, migrants, and Costa Rica might very well be the farthest south that this bird goes. You have to pay attention because we have a lot of tropical kingbirds in this country. Probably the most common bird, one of the most common birds, is the tropical kingbird. So they kind of, they could be together sometimes, and they blend in and they go unnoticed, but then they do make it here, especially again on the Pacific areas. So there is that connection again going with the Pacific, Western North America, and our Pacific areas here. Western kingbirds, they do happen here. Let's see what else. Oh, here's one of my favorites, Mcgillivrays. Another bird that's not common. It's not seen in huge numbers like the morning warbler that a lot of people see here, and they're far more common, sometimes confused. But Mcgillivrays, they heavily depend on brushy areas and old coffee plantations as well. And they do here easily recognized, well, not so easily, but then recognized by the parted eye-ring that they have. Definitely one of the jewels that we have, and it's always a pleasure. Right now in Costa Rica, we're seeing there's a couple of reports each day for Mcgillivrays in different parts of the country, but not numerous. But they come here. Same goes for this guy, Hermit Warbler, another one of your Western specialties. This bird also visits some conifers, and I've seen them, in areas adjacent to coffee plantations like that. So there's a lot of coffee, or there used to be more, but there's still a lot of coffee in this country, as you're going to see in a few minutes, and which support important habitat for these birds. And then the last of the list, I didn't want to put a lot of them because it's taken long already, and is the Western Tanager. Again, that has the abundance, similar case to that of the Townsend's warbler. The wintering grounds are mostly in northern Central America and Mexico, but then they do come here, again, especially on the western areas. They like to hang out in the dry forest areas of the northwest Pacific of Costa Rica. So the beautiful tropical dry forest. And during those months, our forests in that part of the country, they lose their leaves. It looks very brown. It looks kind of, crunchy. I call it crunchy because the leaves are all dry and then not much green there. And then when you find one of these guys, it's like, whoa, and all that brown, there's the beautiful colors of the Western Tanager, which certainly is always a pleasure to see here. So folks, these are basically some of the birds that I wanted to show you, some of your familiar birds, hopefully familiar, some of the birds that you see in your part of the world. And now a little bit more about conservation, right? BirdLife International has already described 21, these are called IBAs, important bird areas, right? These are areas or habitat that offers conditions for both resident, endangered species, migratory species. So the IBAs in Costa Rica account for more than 50% of the country. So these are areas that need attention. These are areas that, need to be taken care of because this is what our birds use. Sometimes a lot of these habitats are in places that we're very familiar with. I'm going to do a very, brief description here of some of the habitats, not all, but some of the habitats, right? Let's start by these areas that we're really familiar with. For example, yards and gardens. Like I said, I have some of those migrants here in my yard. There are places that are well known for having visitors or passage birds each year, even in urban areas, in big cities. I don't live in a big city. I live in a small, medium-sized city north of San Jose. And so sure enough, we have that. But then even in San Jose, the biggest city in downtown, you can find some of the specialties, some of the habitat, I guess, for these migrants. Town squares, we call them parques here, as in parks. This one, I put this one because it was a hot spot for this migration, this fall migration. Right around here, along the shore, we had a couple of red knots, which are not common at all for us here. And they were moving along here, and lots of us, because I went there to see them, we could find them along this. This is on the East Coast. This is on the Caribbean coast, in the town of Limon. It's a city, a port, busy, but then they have these little oases here. It says Parque Vargas. And that day I went there. I was after the red knots, of course, but I also around these trees here. I saw the gray kingbird, which is a very unusual, uncommon migrant for us here. Comes mostly from the Caribbean islands. You hear it happens in Florida, I think. But anyhow, so there was a gray kingbird, which was the big attraction. And basically, as a result of going there, some folks also found the red knots going around here. But there were hundreds of eastern kingbirds, Swainson's, thrushes, yellow warblers. They were, I forgot, I have a list. I have to look up the list and see how many migrant species were found in this green oases that happen in some towns, major cities in the country. So the gardens and towns basically go together. Wetlands and coasts, as I've been saying, the Pacific especially, and those areas that have the mud flats and the salt drying pans that are extremely important. This picture is from Palo Verde National Park in the Pacific, showing a concentration of migratory species, a lot of ducks, a lot of, for example, this is a place where you might see a cinnamon teal here. Blue-winged teals by the hundreds, if not thousands there, and then a mix of resident species as well. So this is a really, really important, protected by Ramsar Convention wetlands. We have 11 Ramsar sites. The Ramsar Convention protects wetlands around the world that are of international importance for migratory species. So we have 11 of those. When I put coast, I also wanted to mention the mangrove forest of our Pacific areas. They are also extremely important for some migrants as well. Then shade-grown coffee. This is something that we see especially in the highlands. Very, very important areas for many migratory species. A lot of the warblers, the migratory warblers from the east and west, they concentrate here in the coffee plantations. They get, what is a shade-grown coffee? Well, if you look down here, all these low bushes, these are the coffee. This is the coffee plantation, coffee bushes. And then the farmers, they keep all these trees there to shade the coffee, because coffee under natural conditions originated in Africa. It's an understory tree, so they basically need a lot of shade to grow. And so this offers premium habitat for many of the migratory species. There's now efforts, I put here a series of organizations that are sponsoring this practice of shade-grown coffee in Central America. Bird Friendly from the Smithsonian, Rainforest Alliance, and they do have, you know, these certifications for farmers down here in order to keep the habitat, and because coffee business is not great always, you know, the prices go up and down, and so it's hard for some of these farmers to keep up. All right, I'm taking a little bit longer here. And here's the other place that I wanted to talk to you about. This is on the South Caribbean part of the country, right between the coast. There's a narrow belt of land between the coast and the mountains right there. So this is where that funnel ends for us here. And this is one of the most important sites in all of Latin America for raptors. This number, the place is called Quecoldi. It's an indigenous reserve. It's an indigenous territory. There's a group of indigenous people that live there, and the Bribri group, and they basically have their reserve. So they have, again, land and habitat. But then what happens here is that the migratory raptors pass through there by the millions. This was the latest number updated for just one site. For that site, they have a tower. And 2,659 and 108, I'm sorry, individuals passed through there this fall. This says November, but then at the bottom here, the red numbers are the total for fall of 2021. And it's still counting. There's still more going. They can get up to 3.5 million raptors. So far, they have identified 17 species of raptors going through there. Number one, with more than 1 million, turkey vultures, followed by broad-winged hawks, Mississippi kites, and then Swainson's hawks. Those are the top three. But then it's probably the most important place in the Middle Americas, where the migration for the peregrine falcons, probably number one place, is they have so far 2,629 peregrine falcons identified passing through that area, just that one spot, right? And only after the Rio de Rapaces, the River of Raptors in Veracruz, Mexico, comes Quecoldi as one of the most important sites in all of the Americas for migratory raptors. It's important because, like I said, it's run by indigenous community there, so they get some profits, essentially, people visiting. we're going to see this incredible migration. I went there last fall with my wife, and then we were just stunned to see all the hawks and all the vultures. And not only that, we also had the common nighthawks, and then there were thousands of swallows migrating at that time. That was about a month ago. And this is all happening in the south, in the narrow section of the South Caribbean coast of Costa Rica, in the Quetzal. If you want to look it up, there's a website. They're a nonprofit conservation group, quetzaldi.org. You can find more information from them right there. They're accepting volunteers, and they do have this incredible conservation work going on right there. Okay, moving on. What are the dangers of migration? Well, climatic changes, right, affecting habitat. For example, cloud forests are not receiving the same amount of clouds that they're supposed to, or rainforests sometimes are not receiving the same amount of rainforests. So that alterates the normal behavior of trees and the production of fruit and the insects. So that changes their food supply. That's how climatic change can affect. Of course, we are all well aware of window collisions. We have that here too. In the United States alone, it is believed that about 1 billion birds die each year from window collisions. So that's sad. There's a group here that is currently collecting information and educating people on how to, again, prevent these accidents. And I invite you all to do the same thing at home. I'm sure there's organizations that will have information for you in case you know of a place or know somebody that's having problems with birds, killing themselves in windows. Car also collisions, wind farms in some places, right? So it's a bit of a problem. It's a big problem, not a bit of a problem, right? And then habitat degradation. There are other dangers, but I put probably the top three. This is a pineapple plantation that they came right up to the edge of the river. And then a highway passes through there, so the habitat was basically changed here. This is in the Caribbean lowlands. So habitat degradation, destruction of suitable habitat is one of the biggest risks. Costa Rica, luckily, we have internationally recognized efforts for the protection of our biodiversity. We have 26% of the land here that is protected under different categories of public land. This is national wilderness protected areas, basically, and 26%. There's about 5% of the territory that is protected by private organizations, and there's another small percentage there that is privately protected by individuals, not necessarily organizations, but individuals too, like land, easements, and basically compensation for protecting habitat like that. And so that's something that we're doing. Costa Rica is one of the leaders in our well-rounded conservation policies. It's not perfect, but it's there, and that's one of the fundamentals why Costa Rica, offers good opportunities for visiting birds and visiting tourists to see and enjoy our natural resources. Quickly here, as individuals, what we can do, right, as birders. Bird can be more than a hobby. It can be a way of contributing to citizen science by submitting observations, becoming active and part of organizations like Cornell University. And there's eBird, of course, that most of you might be familiar with. A lot of the information I'm giving you today, it's from eBird, collected over years from eBird. There's iNaturalist, and all these platforms. Technology today offers great opportunities, right? So it's a good invitation for, if you're not part of it yet, to become part and then become a responsible birder, right? As citizens, well, let's choose wisely our leaders, right? The ones that will make thoughtful decisions, committed to the true conservation of these resources, right? In science-based legislation and conservation, basically, not just rumors and things like that. And as consumers, well, buy wisely, right? I mentioned earlier with the coffee, right? Support coffee farmers here that are making efforts for conservation, right? Grass-fed beef that offers habitat, not the best, but does offer some habitat, and of course, stuff that comes from the sea, because it's really important. And I wanted to close here. 8 o'clock. Costa Rica is one of the top 20 countries with the biggest biodiversity. We're home of approximately 500,000 species of different organisms. This represents roughly 6%, 5-6% of the world's biodiversity in an area that only represents 0.3% of the world's land mass, as you can read there. So as I was mentioning earlier, small country, but dense, intense, densely populated in terms of biodiversity, right? Not so much people, but biodiversity. This is also an invitation to learn more about our conservation efforts. If you haven't been to Costa Rica, this is an invitation for you to, come here and learn and see hopefully some of these videos that we have here. And yeah, definitely Costa Rica it's right there. It's not far, it's a short flight from, I guess, the US, different parts of the US, many flights here. And we're open. The next slide doesn't have anything to do with my presentation about migrants and those, but I know now the way the world is and what we have in our minds, we always have that. So is it okay to go there? Well, let me show you some of it. Next year, we're gonna start asking all visitors and locals here to have proof of vaccination, right? And restaurants, hotels, places like that well, this is supposed to be mandatory by starting next year. This chart, I took this picture. This is a screenshot earlier today, November 15. Look at the drop in number of cases that we've had. This is weekly cases, right? We're now in a sincere decline in the number of cases locally. Look at the population vaccinated. We have almost 60% of the people that are fully vaccinated right now. So that's getting us there. It's getting us more confidence. We are opening now more. We had some restrictions that helped contain the spread of the virus, but then now we're seeing the results of that. And so the government has done a pretty good job, I would say, right, in terms of containing. But of course, we were not spared from the effects of COVID. For us in the tourism business, it has been almost 2 years. And since March of 2020, I have only led 5 trips here in Costa Rica, whereas in typical years, sometimes 5 trips in a month. But then it's like that. So we're hoping for a good recovery, and I hope this brings. And this is local information. This is happening here. I know that hopefully international organizations or organizations will soon grant that Costa Rica is not necessarily free, because nobody is free of this, but we're doing better these days. So thank you all for your attention. I want to close this because Jenny said earlier that we have 2 trips coming this next February, 2 different dates, and we still have some spaces available. Not a lot, but we do have some spaces on both trips. And I want to leave the information here as we move on to questions. If you have any, a little bit longer than I thought, but this was exciting. And so this information you can. This is Kath Gill, is a good friend of mine. She's been to Costa Rica numerous times, and this is her phone number and email, and she has all the detailed information about our trips sponsored by LAS and myself and coming next year. But thank you all for your attention. Please, if you have questions, Jenny, please, I'm ready.
Thank you so much, Mario. That was fantastic. Learned a lot, and I was very happy to see you highlighting the turkey vultures because they're a favorite of mine. I love the unlovables.
Nice.
But we do have a few questions, and if folks have additional questions, feel free to type them in the chat or the Q&A. If you're on Facebook, feel free to put them in the comment section of the live stream there. You can also try raising your hand and we may be able to unmute you. We haven't tested out that feature yet. We're still learning as we go. But if you want to ask a question live, you can also try raising your hand. But we do have 2 questions from Joan. You had that graphic that was showing the different migration patterns, and she said it looks like late December is a low period for migration through Costa Rica. Is that correct?
Late December, yes. I wouldn't necessarily call it low. The difference is that, as I mentioned, there is some that winter here, others that pass through here. So the passage period, it's in full force in October and in November. So by then it starts to slow down a little bit, but then you also have the chance to see the ones that stay here. And there's always the late migrants. There's always that. But then many of them, of those, they do stay here. But late December it's a nice time. You will see migrants. Of course, not as many as in October. And the difference, and I have to say this, October is also the rainiest month of the year here. And we live in the rainforest, so you can imagine what that's like. You guys don't live in the rainforest. So it's the weather could be a factor, but again, you will see migrants in December for sure.
Great. And then she also asked, as a traveler coming to Costa Rica, are there actions we can take to assist in helping the environment down there?
Absolutely, yes. Support local conservation organizations. We can probably, I can send you a list of who's doing such work like that. Kekoldi with the Hawk Watch place, that they're doing a great job there. There's other people that I know that they're doing some monitoring with radio transmitters and keeping track of the migrants that are here. There's some local small organizations that own their own reserves, so by visiting you are supporting them. And also we have in Costa Rica a certification for businesses here in tourism industry. It's called the CST, Certificate for Sustainable Tourism, CST. And then if you are going to come here, try and see if you can stay at places that are part of this, because this has to do with the certification, sustainability regarding the environment, regarding the social protocols, and regarding their relation with the communities and all that. So this is a pretty interesting project that we have in the country. So CST is a good way to travel responsibly here.
And I believe if you join in the LAS trips, there is a portion of the fee is going to support some local conservation efforts down there. Is that correct?
That's true. I thank you for reminding me of that, Jenny. Certainly, part of the funds that will be collected from our trips in February, they will be to support 3 local conservation groups here. And I can mention them. One is it's a small group that has an interesting reforestation project right near around a volcano. Another one, they're doing conservation work with one of the endemics, the Cabanis ground sparrow. And the other one, they're doing work with the 3-wattle bellbird, restoring habitat for those birds. So funds will go directly to these organizations during our trips.
Great. I don't see any other questions. Joan did thank you for the information on the CST. That's great to have that information for anybody traveling down there. If anybody else has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll work on wrapping this up. If folks are interested in the trip, please contact Kath. She's happy to answer questions. She's led trips like this before and has worked closely with Mario, so she knows the routine and can answer any questions you may have about the upcoming trips. Also, I did want to acknowledge, I apologize, somebody mentioned there's no closed captions on tonight's webinar. We are still learning the technology, and I had intended to activate those, but I failed to. Parker is planning on posting this webinar on YouTube, hopefully later this week, and we'll add closed captions for that, for anybody who had trouble hearing. I sincerely apologize. We are working to make things accessible to everyone. So hopefully we can get that in the future. But if there are no more questions, I think I will thank you, Mario, again. Super interesting talk once again, and we really appreciated having you here, connecting Nevada down to Costa Rica, and I'm super excited for folks to get down there to visit you, and very jealous of them as well. And hopefully I'll be able to make it down there sometime in the near future. But thanks for all that you're doing, and hope everyone has a wonderful night and a happy Thanksgiving. And we'll catch you in December for talk on Pinyon Jays, hopefully. Keep an eye out for that information.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.